Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us for AppSheet Office Hours focused on app lifecycle management. My name is Lauren and I'm the content manager on the Google Cloud community team. With us today are Christian and Rich from the AppSheet team who will be taking you through our content today and answering your questions. So if you do have any questions, please add those into the YouTube chat and we will be sure to get to them. Any questions that we don't get to today, we'll be having a recap post in the AppSheet community. You can find a link to that in the YouTube description, where we'll be sharing the recording, supporting resources, and writing out your questions and answers. So with that, I will hand it over to Christian to take us through our content.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lauren. Very happy to be here again in our office hours. And so today we're going to be talking about essentially the entire life cycle of building, creating, deploying, sharing, maintaining, monitoring an application. We definitely have a lot of content to share with you today, but feel free to ask us questions. We will switch into the overall, just the overall concept, the topics that we're going to cover. All right. So this is our agenda. It's pretty much covering what I said. So let's dive right into the design aspects of your app. And by design, what I mean is kind of like even before you're actually visually designed, you just want to do some initial planning for your application, right? So in this sense, you have to start with some high-level questions and keep in mind what AppSheet, what it provides. So is your use case actually a good fit for AppSheet? So there are definitely some things to consider. First off, do you need to have a mobile UI, or do you need a more just traditional desktop UI? That's a pretty fundamental question that you want to ask. Fortunately, with AppSheet, it does provide capabilities for both. Another very important question right away is do you need to have a very a pixel perfect type of UI? So there are some times when an application is designed that you need exact placement of buttons and widgets and stuff that have to conform to any kind of, say, whatever specification. That's where AppSheet is probably not going to give you exactly that type of accuracy, but what you do get in contrast is that you get auto generation of UIs that are ready to go and mobile friendly for a number of different types of screen dimensions. So just some things to keep in mind. Some other things to ask yourself very quickly before getting into the actual building of the app is does your application require advanced integration with other APIs and data sources? That's not to say that AppSheet does not connect with other data sources and APIs. It's just that if you have a very long list of very I would say custom types of integrations, then you're less equipped with what you get with AppSheet. AppSheet in general focuses on the core data sources, essentially a very rich list of cloud-based data sources that you can connect to, whether it's a cloud sheet, Google Sheet, Office, Excel sheet, or even SQL databases like Cloud SQL or BigQuery. So you've got a rich palette to choose from. But if you have some very custom data sources that you want to connect to, then you may not quite be able to span the gap, I would say. Another thing is does the application require a lot of complex logic that has to literally be scripted out? That's where it's AppSheet does not provide a traditional programming or scripting environment. It does allow you to make connections to issue webhooks or to call other entities, such as a standalone app script function. You could do that, but these are things that you have to kind of keep in mind when you want to plug in AppSheet into a larger architecture. The other thing is just in general, if you need to quickly build and deploy an app, that's one of AppSheet's key strengths. So if you have, say, if you don't have months, but maybe you have days or even hours to build an application that can serve as a front end to an existing data source, whether it's a spreadsheet or a SQL database or what have you, and if the key requirement is to being able to build it and deploy it quickly, then AppSheet can really help out in that regard. Some other AppSheet strengths to keep in mind is that because it's a database web application, you get full out of the box CRUD functionality. And by CRUD, I mean create, replace, update, delete. So without really doing anything, once you generate an app based off of a spreadsheet, you can do insert, delete, insert, update, delete, query. You can even talk to your app that you get out of the box just by clicking the microphone and just ask for it to give you the records and such. So there's some very powerful functionality that you get merely by just generating a default app that comes out of it. I did touch on mobile-friendly UI generation. It is definitely mobile-friendly. Back in the day, before there was like this notion of being able to handle many different screen sizes, such as tablets and mobile phones and such, you would have to program that using actually quite advanced CSS and HTML to do that. There's this concept of like Flexbox, and you'd have to get into a lot of like fairly sophisticated programming to build that type of a UI. Fortunately, with AppSheet, it builds all that into the app. You don't even have to worry about it. You get essentially a completely mobile-friendly app without even thinking about it. And then, of course, there's the other things like being able to share, collaborate, rapidly prototype your app. And then, of course, the final thing is like, or final two things to touch on is like, if you have the need to build, somewhat moderate levels of automations, the AppSheet onboard automations engine, so to speak, is like a robot or a bot where you can define all the different elements of an automation, whether it's what events to trigger off of, what types of processes and tasks that you want it to do based on these different events. It's very flexible, and it's actually wizard based. And in a sense, it will provide a lot of like suggestions on most common use cases that you would expect to see in that type of environment. And then, of course, the integration with multiple cloud data sources. So you have a rich palette, like I said, to go against really any cloud-based spreadsheet or cloud-based SQL database for the most part, and then other connections, whether it's Salesforce, et cetera, et cetera. So if those are the key things that you find value or that make sense, then you can start to kind of make a case for like why AppSheet would be a good fit for your use case. All right. As far as like getting into the real plumbing of your application, you'll next want to get into the data, the design of your data. And the first question is like, can your data be accessible from the cloud? So like if you have a Google sheet or an Office 365 sheet, or even it's a SQL database or a BigQuery or what have you, first off, just if the data is there, you can make a connection to it and quickly build an app. If the data is not in kind of like the core set of supported data sources, you can always resort to CSV, comma separated value tables or files, and upload them into respective cloud-based services, whether it's a Google Sheet or what have you, and be able to work with that. And then that gives you like that first step of building out your data model. Also, another important thing to consider is like, how much data are you dealing with? Many times it's fine to just build like a simple Google Sheet or what have you, which handles like hundreds or thousands of records. But when you start to get into literally millions of records, then you need to make a decision. It's like, well, maybe Google Query would be like a BigQuery would be like the right backend technology, which you could then connect to AppSheet and build the front end off of that. Also, a very important point is if your data is relational. So if you have like different data entities, tables as such, that you have for each record, you could have multiple records from another table. Master details, another example of this. Employees, departments, and such. The nice thing about AppSheet is it just handles it for you. Like if you have an existing relational database, you could connect it as a data source in AppSheet. And AppSheet will be able to generate the appropriate UI, meaning like if you click through a set of records, it will then allow you to drill into the related records automatically. So in traditional web application development, those steps require a lot of programming and a lot of plumbing, so to speak, to make that sophisticated interactions work. In this case, AppSheet just does it for you. It will build a fully relational UI that supports your relational data. And then also, in general, if you're just kind of getting started, I would say the best thing is just start out with a simple spreadsheet and start to just take your columns and let those be kind of like the core data model entities. So you like have a name or the date or a list of values that could be in a dropdown. That would be like if you have like validation built into the spreadsheet, things like that. And so another thing, if you have existing data, say in a sheet, and you want to use it in an app sheet, you'll want to think about how to prepare that sheet in a way such that it provides you the most efficient or the most pain-free way to actually allowing AppSheet to do it. So in this sense, it's always good to take a sheet, make a copy of it. Say you have a sheet that has a lot of formulas, has like a lot of data, has a lot of formatting, for example. You'd want to kind of strip away any unnecessary visual formatting, you want to take your formulas and take them out, for example, because AppSheet does not parse individual formulas in spreadsheets, but you can essentially take the core data and try to make it into like more of a tabular format, and then you can bring it into AppSheet and quickly generate your apps, and you'll have at least pain-free. A note about validation. So if you built in like validation into any of your cells, such that it only allows like a certain list of input values. And so, for example, you can see that in this little image here where you have like drop downs for like whether an item is completed. That's something that you can actually leave in your spreadsheet. So in this sense, AppSheet, when it takes the schema of your data, it will actually take all that into account and generate the appropriate data model objects, as well as they're called enumerated types, as well as the UI. So whether you want a drop down or buttons and stuff, it gets auto-generated for you. So you don't even have to worry about that. And I think I touched on the fact that relational data is handled. Now, there is a small technique that you would do with sheets and relational data. It simply means that I can have like multiple related tables. I just have to name the tabs, like say I have employees and departments or what have you. I could just create one column in my first table that is the same name of another tab for the other table. And so that's what AppSheet can look at. It will say, oh, these are related tables. So let's go ahead and create a reference. And that's a special data type that allows you to connect multiple tables. All right. So again, these are kind of high-level things that you kind of want to familiarize yourself as you're getting into starting to build an app. Now, speaking of data, for each column that you define in a spreadsheet, it's going to be converted into kind of like a core set of data types, which are kind of fundamentally text, number, date, and Boolean. But AppSheet then applies those core data types into the most appropriate AppSheet data types. So for example, if you have just some basic text in a spreadsheet, it's going to take it, convert it into any number of text-based data types on the AppSheet side. So you'll see like commonly just basic text fields will be text fields in AppSheet. Or if you have lots of text in a certain cell, it will automatically define it as long text. Same thing for dates. Dates will automatically be assigned a date data type. Numbers, financial numbers, you'll get decimal, things like that. So this is one of the key features of AppSheet, being able to look at your data, parse through it, and say, okay, these look like email addresses, these look like phone numbers, these look like geographical data, this looks like a color, all these things like that, that it takes all those hints from the data that you have in your sheet, and it will automatically generate the appropriate data type. And then it's up to you. You can go into the data model editor and select or tweak, change, customize, what have you, into the even a more appropriate type of a data or data type on AppSheet. All right. Now, you've got your data more or less figured out. You're able to bring it into a sheet or what have you and generate an app. AppSheet will then go and start to create a UI for you that's fully functioning and ready to work immediately. Now, the thing is that in this sense, you probably can get more familiar with the key things to be aware of for building your UI in AppSheet. Fundamentally, you want to ask yourself: how do you want your data to be presented to the user? Do you want like forms? Do you want like long card types? Do you want lists and things like that? And this is where you'll find AppSheet does provide a rich palette of different types of what are called view types, where the views are essentially different ways to essentially view the data. And then of course the other thing to keep in mind is like the end goal is it going to be, say, for a frontline worker, where typically frontline workers might be out on a call or inspections or in a factory area or something, and where they might need a smaller UI to work with. So in that sense, you probably want to skew your app towards your traditional or like more like mobile friendly types of UIs. On the other side of it, if you have a more just like a traditional desktop worker, you have the ability to take that same app and just also kind of skew it more towards like a desktop worker in that sense, right? And then also just as you get more and more familiar with the AppSheet editor, it has kind of like three fundamental areas. You have your navigation bar, which has all of the different elements. You're typically dealing with like the data tab, the UX tab, which is essentially UX is user experience or user interface, that kind of stuff. By clicking on that, that gives you like essentially your editor in the middle in the main pane for customizing the UI. And then, of course, you have the preview that's always present on the right side. So it's pretty straightforward, although the editor may not be exactly the same as like a lot of other editors where you might have like preview in a different position and things like that. But it's pretty straightforward once you get started. All right. So talking about sharing and deploying. So this can be summed up in this one slide for the most part. And there's actually a video that I put out last year which walks through this step in a full demo. And I'll give a demo of this as well. But basically, you start off with your application that you're building. And then the first step is to say, maybe you want to allow other editors to come and help you build your app out. So that's a relatively simple process by where you can share the app with other users or co-authors, other people who have edit access. And then once you've done that, you can start to share the application amongst your user population in that sense. So that's a relatively straightforward. You'll have to decide at what scope you want to share it to, whether it's just within your group, your domain, or whether you want to share actually the ability to share it on the open web and such. So definitely some things to check. Once you feel that your app is in a relatively good state to where you want to share it, maybe with like for a core set of users, you could do a deployment check, which just goes through the list of things that you want to keep in mind before you actually deploy the app. And then finally, when you're ready to deploy a first version of your app, you can essentially designate or switch the state of the app to being deployed. And that's when the app becomes a deployed app. Nothing really fundamentally changes. There's no like transfer of applications to a different server or anything like that. It just changes the state of the app, but then people can then start accessing it. And then you can also create a profile if you want. And so like a profile is an option to where you can actually create a shareable template of your application. So I'll go into that in a little bit more detail, but for now, we can just kind of step into a basic demo of how to share and deploy your app, all right? So in this case, I have kind of like a similar app that we used in our last, I guess in our app jam. And so this is a spreadsheet that it has like requests and users. I generated a basic app from here. And then that's what we have over here. Here's my basic app. But let's say I want to collaborate. I want to share the app with another user, or in this case, maybe a co-author. So in this case, I just clicked on the little icon on the top right, which is similar to like Google Docs or such. And then I'm going to add another developer. I just happen to know is within this domain. All right. And hit tab, that validates that. And so notice here I can say this is for users, or they can view the definition. They can actually go into the application editor, but only in read-only mode, or they can actually become an editor and actually change actual artifacts of the app itself. So in this case, I'm bringing another essentially full-on developer or creator of the application. I'll just kind of click on that, let them know that I'm fine, and I'll click send. And then this will go ahead and send out an invite to another developer. So I happen to have this other window open in this other profile, I guess. And so you'll see this invite just got sent 0 minutes ago. And so at this point, this person could then either edit the application or install it. And so then they'll be able to actually interact with the application directly as well. So it's pretty basic. And then when they edit it, of course, they'll open it up in their own editor and they'll be able to change things. One thing about concurrent editing, that's not like fully supported. So you won't necessarily be able to like start doing intricate multi-concurrent editing as such just yet, but that's something that's under discussion to offer that. But in general, the typical apps that most people build, there are typically 1 or 2 people that they'll have like an editing pass, and then they'll hold off, and then someone else might want to do something else on another component of the app. So just, things to keep in mind. All right. And deploying the app. Oh, let's see, go over here. So say I've gone through, I've added my Joe developer, other editor. We've got our app pretty good. We built out a UI that should work for us. I've gone in, customized things as I see it. I could then just click on this link right here, not deployed. There's different ways to get into there, but basically this brings us up to like a status of our deployment. And so this actually does like a deployment check. So typically, it does like a deployment check. There's a button there, but in this case, it already jumped into it. And there's some little warnings here, but they're not really that urgent, if I want to change to a custom launch icon, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, actually, this is actually an important one, content caching on the mobile device. If I want to have like a lot of data and I want it to be cached and it has performance ramifications, then yeah, you can go in and start to toggle those settings as well. All right. So I think I'm good to go. I've done my deployment check. I can actually go ahead and deploy the application. So let's go ahead and click on Move App to Deployed State. And then at this point, the application is considered deployed. All right. So nothing fancy, but now you'll notice over here, it shows up as being deployed. And on my apps screen here, you'll notice that when I do a refresh, this app here, which is the one I just deployed, will jump up to our deployed apps. So I'll just hit refresh, and we'll see our Office Hours app that will pop up right here. So that's the app itself. And I forget which state I left it in, but we'll come back to that in a second on like how someone else can go in and either preview the app or create a copy of it, but that's covered in my next slides. All right. So as you recall, in my previous slide, there's an option to create a shareable template, and that's something that you could then expand your app coverage. So maybe you just want to offer it to the public, or you wanted to offer it to like a larger team, so to speak. So in this sense, this is where you can go through and do a few steps. Like first off, you can prepare your account itself for publishing. So in this sense, you would create a portfolio description. So it gives like at least a description, and then that will give you the ability to have a link that you could then share outside. And so in this case, to actually edit that, you go into the main AppSheet home, you click on the My Account page, and there is this tab here for collab, and then you just put a portfolio description. And so that's what you will get right out of the box. And I could even show you, I have my portfolio description or portfolio right here. And this actually has our last app jam that we did. And right now the settings are such that it's hidden. Like when I've deployed it, it doesn't actually show up. But I could actually, I'll do it in a second, but I can toggle that so that it will appear. Oh, also, you'll want to customize your app a little bit. You add a short description. That way people know what it is. So you go under Info, Properties, Apps, Properties. So it's a little bit hard. Once you get used to the navigation, Info, Properties, and then short description, you'll be able to set the description. And then also there is a community page. When you click on the community link or the icon, which is over here, when I click on this, this actually brings me to like a staging page where it provides information of like the application. I probably shouldn't do that one per se. I don't want to change anything. But in this case, as you can see, we actually have the Office Hours application here. So if I click on that, it's done that. I can actually change it. I don't want to deploy. Oh, I'm sorry. I did it on my the wrong template. But you get the idea. What happens is that when you create a shareable template, meaning like you go into the visibility setting for your application, which means like you go under well, first you click on Manage, you go to Author, and then you click on Teamwork, and then you can toggle these settings, make this a public sample or a team sample, and then you can change the visibility. Now, likewise, you can also toggle this hide app definition, which means that you can make it so that the app itself is not editable, but they can actually see it there, right? So I'll click on that. So here's what, if I'm going to go ahead and click on the Office Hours app that was just put out there. And if I click on that, it will take me to a screen that offers the ability to see the application. And here, because I would, in this case, maybe opened up edit access, this would allow people to go ahead and actually look into the application and copy and customize at that point, right? And then, of course, there's just a pure read-only look under the hood, so to speak, and that allows you to then share it. So if I go back to my application, in this case, my Lifecycle application, and I click on Manage, Author, Teamwork. This is the UI here. Make this a public sample, and then hide app definition. But maybe I want to change the visibility, so I could do that. So then it would become like a read-only mode there. So if I looked at that application from that preview, then it would only just show like the I think it was this one. Sorry, give us a second. Yeah, this one right here. So this is what happens when you hide the app definition. Users will only be able to see just the preview of the application itself. And then it also allows you to go back to their portfolio, which in essence is just going back where you came from. All right. So hopefully that's relatively straightforward. You'll have to kind of get familiar with the options to go under manage, author, teamwork, understanding how to set the properties, like what's the purpose of the app. That's what actually shows up on this next screen here. See, the purpose of this app shows up right there. But once you do it a few times, it starts to kind of make sense in this regard. Also, as a side note, we'll be doing more of these like sharing templates when we do our office hours. So anytime we do a demo, we'll just kind of throw it into, I don't know if I'll keep it in my own personal portfolio or we'll make it into like a larger portfolio for the office hours, but we'll see. We'll discuss that. Let's see, anything else? I did the demo, publishing your app on your portfolio. I think I've walked through most of that stuff where I did this, changed the visibility, then I went back to the portfolio here, which is essentially this one right here. So because it's deployed, it shows up. If I were to take the application and undeploy it, return back to prototype state, then the application will disappear and I will not see it in my portfolio. I'll give it a second and I can look over in the same portfolio, which is just a live link that anyone can go to. And I will see that it has disappeared. So there you go. So hopefully that generally makes sense. Not too much, not rocket science necessarily, but it can be a little bit tricky with regards to knowing how to navigate the different options in the menus and the tabs inside of AppSheet. And if you're asking if that's going to be updated to make it more streamlined, the answer is a big yes. There's current work underway to continue to refine the app or AppSheet editor such that it's more streamlined and just a lot more intuitive, especially for the no and low code crowd. So anyway, with that, I'd like to hand it over to Rich. And Lauren, feel free. I'm going to stop presenting if that's okay for you.
Perfect. Yeah, we're ready for you, Rich. And one note too is just that with any of these app templates that we're creating for office hours or for the app jams, we'll be sharing with you in the community in the recap post. All right, Rich, over to you.
Thanks, Christian. Appreciate it. Thanks, Lauren. So next, we're going to cover monitoring applications. And why is this important? These tools that we're about to go over give you the visibility and the transparency into the interactions that are going on inside your app, which can ultimately give you an understanding on the adoption of the application itself. And more importantly, the methods and ability to troubleshoot any errors that are going on into your application. So there's 4 main areas that we're going to cover. And we're going to cover, there's automation monitoring tool, there's usage statistics, there's an audit history, and there's a performance profile. We're going to go into details on each one of these. And first, we're going to save the automation for last. I know it's up first, but we're going to go into the more important tools first. And let's first start with the usage statistics. So I'm going to flip over to the app editor specifically, and I'm in one of my apps that I have, right? And I've gone to the manage and monitor section of the app editor. And I'll see those same four categories that I just covered in the slideshow previously. And first, we're going to focus on usage stats. And we're going to click on Get Usage Statistics. And this is exactly what it sounds like. This isn't complex. This is basically a list per day or a chart per day of how many people are using your applications, unique users. So you can get a sense on the adoption level. And then if you continue scrolling down, you could start to see on a more granular level how many people per day. And then even further, if you go down, you can start to see the individual email addresses of your applications. And this app isn't frequently used, obviously, but these charts will actually stack on each other. So you could have a very granular breakdown of app interactions per user if you need to, and actually select the user and see when users are using the app. So this could be helpful in coaching and understanding change management in an organization as well. When there might not be an uptick in adoption, you can actually try to understand when people are accessing it, or even if they are even trying to access your application. So that's usage statistics. Next, we're going to get into probably one of the most important areas of monitoring, and that's audit history. And first, right off the bat, when you open up audit history and expand it a little bit, you have the option to turn on alerts. And by turning this option on, it basically will send you an email every time there's an error that happens to one of your users. So if they try to get into an app and there's a sync error or any kind of error that gives you that warning, that screen in your app that something went wrong, you're going to get an email notification that something went wrong. So this allows you to be a little bit more proactive as well in detecting errors by using this feature. And then what we'll come down to now is to actually view the data in the audit log. We're going to launch the log analyzer. And once we land into this, this tool here, you'll see that we're going to also provide you recommendations on ways to improve your app sync speed. Mostly this involves server caching or basically not having complex formulas in your app. So we'll provide these recommendations up top, but the real valuable information is going to be down below. And you basically, all this data I'm about to cover and show you, you can filter this data as well. So the audit log keeps track of every single user interaction that happens in your app, from the syncs that occur in your app to the adds, updates, deletes, or any workflow and automations, or even API calls that happen within your application. And you can filter that too by the type, the ability to only display failures if you want to, or a date range. And depending on your plan, AppSheet's going to keep up to 2 years worth of audit history of your app. So you're always able to go and drill down and figure out when a user is complaining about certain issues. You'll be able to get a sense on what their experience as well from the back end of your application. So as we continue to scroll down, we could basically see the different users and their activity that have occurred. And then down below is where we get into the good stuff as far as the data goes, where you see each operation that occurs. And as I mentioned, it's going to show by the operation type here, whether it's an app sync or an add or update or one of the various other interactions in your app. And especially with app sync, so you start to get a sense on how long apps take to load. And this can give first, indicators into when your apps start to become slower, maybe from too much data or from other issues that exist in your application. And for any of these logged events that occur and get added to your audit log, you're going to want to click the binocular icon here under details. And this is going to pull up basically all the different operations that have occurred in that single event, right? So you can literally drill down to specific times or parameter values that have been set in your app to help you identify what may be the root cause of an error that your users are experiencing. So you have this ability. So I would definitely recommend you using this whenever you start to see issues. This is going to be your lifeline to try to figure out what's going on. All right, so next I'm going to back out here. So that was audit history, and that covers all your transaction histories for your users. Next is performance profile. So if you have, this is really going to become relevant when you have more complex apps that may have a lot of tables or a lot of records in a single table. You'll notice your app will start to slow down the more data that exists in the application. And this performance profile can help you pinpoint where those bottlenecks are in your application. So just like the audit log, you have the same kind of flow here with recommendations, the ability to filter each of the logged events. The big difference between the performance profile table here and the audit log table is that when you view the details for each logged event, you get a different screen that you can look at that allows you to drill down into a sync event and see exactly how long something has taken. So we can basically drill down here and see what tables are, and how long they're taking to sync. And we could identify bottlenecks for the tables that may be causing an app sync time to draw out. So if we're looking here, we could definitely, identify that this training log table and, these training tables here maybe are the culprits in our sync time being 2 seconds long, because these other tables don't take as long to sync compared to your other tables. So definitely use this. This allows you to, kind of see exactly where your bottlenecks are in your app and help improve efficiencies, whether you need to implement security filters or other, data partitioning to improve the speed of your application. And just a quick call out here up above. By default, you're only going to see the slow steps in this log, but you can uncheck these boxes up on top and have basically every single thing that time that and process that runs in your app down to individual columns if you want. So you have that at your disposal. All right, so moving on. So we've covered usage stats, audit history, and performance profile. And last, we're going to cover automation. And I say that for the end because automations aren't, used by everyone all the time. But if you do create automations within your application, this is where this tool is going to help you understand what steps in your automation, if you're running into issues with your automation, what steps in that process are having problems. So we can go ahead and launch the monitor itself. We'll see that the monitor itself is an AppSheet app. And in this, we're able to click on the app that we want to view the monitoring results for. And when you click on that, you're going to basically filter down to that specific application. And there's 3 different categories that you'll be able to look at, or sections of this tool. One's your high-level metrics, where you can see the bot status per day, and if there's any errors, they would show up here in yellow. In this case, there's no errors, but this gives you a high-level overview of your success metrics for your automations. To troubleshoot any issues, you're going to use the run section here, and this is where it gets a little bit more complex. But the flow is basically from the app level to the bot level, where you can view what bots have run in your app. If you recall, the bots themselves are the entities that may contain multiple events and steps of the process, and you can identify what bots are having issues or fail, and you'll see them highlighted in red if they do fail. And you could click on those bots and then start to see the event. And then more importantly, the different steps of the process that would ultimately cause failure. And you could click on those steps and get the values that were processed by AppSheet during each of those steps. So just like with the audit log, in a way, you're able to drill down to those steps specifically to get a sense on where you might have problems in your automation so you can make improvements. And then lastly, with document parsers is the third section of this tool. And this applies if you're using any of the OCR capabilities with W9 form capture or invoice or receipt capture as a data source. So basically files on Google Drive. And this would show basically your document parses for each of the app and whether they were successful or not. And you get the actual details into what the backend OCR, the optical character recognition process, read as part of those values. So with that, for the monitoring section, we're going to, that covers the monitoring section. So, Lauren, unless there's any important questions or, big questions that have come up here, we can continue into the next section. And that's going to be the main maintenance of your application.
Yeah, I think we're seeing some great questions come in. Thank you all. We have them starred here to address, but I think let's roll through maintain, and then we'll get to all the questions at the end.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so next we're going to get into the maintenance, right? And what we're going to show is basically the maximum possible lifecycle maintenance setup that you can do in the current the way the AppSheet is working, right? And you'll want to apply some temperance to this what we're about to cover today. If your app has 1 or 2 users, you probably don't need to go full bore into this creating these test environments. But what we're going to cover here is how with AppSheet you can create a test environment and seamlessly deploy and update and upgrade applications so that your end users don't see much downtime at all, because you're accomplishing a lot of this in the background. So first off, what we want to cover is version history of the app. And what this slide is showing you is that in order to every single time an AppSheet app is saved, a new version is created in your application. And we're going to use that knowledge to enable some features in the application. And our ultimate goal, if we're going to set up a new environment for our application, a test environment that we can implement changes freely without worrying of affecting production users, is we're going to need to create a stable version of our app. So if we jump into the app editor here, we're going to go to enable this version control, we're going to go to manage versions, and under stable version, you'll see that there's this option here. If I hit save here, you need to save your app first, which I hadn't done. Second here. So as I mentioned before, you'll want to create a stable version of the application here. And to do that, what we're going to do is click this button here that says make the current version stable. And what this does is it locks in a version of the app for your users so you can continue to make changes in your app without worry of having them immediately deployed, especially if you make mistakes while you're creating your application. All right, so that's the first step here. Once you have the stable version set in your app, what you're going to want to do is make a copy of your application. So getting back to the slide overview that we were looking at previously, to create a new environment within AppSheet, what we're showing here is you want to take your latest version of the app, whatever that is, and make a copy of the app and give that copy a new name that you could easily tell the difference between the production version and the test version. And in addition to that, remember, because the AppSheet app itself connects to the data source in the background, but that data source can be independent. You also need to make a copy of that data structure, more specifically, not necessarily the data itself, but ensure you have a copy of the data structure, whether you're making a copy of the sheet or another database table that copies the data from the production source. You need to have a copy so that your data is independent and allows you to test without messing up your production data. So there's 2 key pieces there, right, that you would need to accomplish that. And to copy an app, if you want to jump back into the app editor, Lauren, to copy the app, we'll basically want to come here to author, and down at the bottom of the screen, you'll see this option to copy the app, okay? And you'll want to make sure that, and AppSheet's going to help you make a copy of your data because you have this option down below to make sure that you can copy your data as well. So this will naturally make it easy to create that dev data source as well. That's completely separate from your production environment, just by making sure that these toggles are enabled. So once you do that, you're going to create it just like you would with any other application. You're going to have a copy of the app that's completely separate from your production app that's connected to your data, your new separate data source. That's for dev purposes only. And you can proceed at that point to go make changes to your app, make changes to your data source, and then prepare it for release. So what we just covered was, if you want to jump back to the slides, Lauren. So this is all about creating that test environment and creating this separate environment. So next, we're going to cover what happens when you need to now upgrade your production application with your test instance. And this is where it gets a little bit more, I won't say convoluted, but there's a little bit more. You need to pay more attention in this process to make sure that all the settings get carried over correctly, right? So when we're upgrading our production application from our test environment, there's really two main things that need to happen. First, we need to pull in the test app into our production app, and we'll show you how to do that in a second. And the second thing is we need to make sure that if we made any changes to the data source, and more importantly, the data source structure, that data source structure change has been updated in production as well. And anytime you're going to be making a data source structure change, that's typically going to require downtime with your app, because you have to change the database or the sheet in the background and add columns for your application. So that would be the one area where you would need to bring down the app temporarily, is if you need to change the backend structure. Now, if you don't need to change the backend structure of your table and you're doing mainly front-end changes within your app, then that's a little easier, and that's where you can seamlessly deploy those changes to the app. So to perform the app upgrade, if we jump back into the app editor, what we're going to do is go to Manage and Versions, and you'll see this app upgrade section of your app. And all you're going to do, and this is going to be in your production app, right? So right now I'm in my production app, and I'm looking to upgrade it from my development, my test version. And what I'm going to do is put the name of my test version in here. That's all I have to do, put the name of the app, and the name of the app can be found up here in the URL called App ID. So it's, App ID equals, in this case, Safety Portal and the number there. And that's what you would put in there, targeting that test copy that you've been making changes to. And you could also create a new major app version in your app as well to signify that you've done this upgrade to your app. So when you're viewing your version history of your app, you could see when that big upgrade occurred. And then you hit the app upgrade piece. And what's going to happen in this case is the app definition from your test environment will now become your production version, including the name of the app. So the first step you would have to do is change the title of your app from the dev version back to the main title of your application. And then, more importantly, if you remember, because our app was connected to the test tables or the development tables that were completely separate from our production tables, you're going to need to come down through all the different tables in your app, and under storage here, retarget those to your production sources. And that's as simple as, basically browsing for more data here and selecting your production data source and just changing your tables to the new source. And you'd go through those one by one, making sure your data source is now connected to your production data source. And once that's been completed for both your tables and your image store, remember there's two things here. You have your table from your databases or your Google Sheets, and then you have the places where your documents and images are stored. So you need to make sure both of those are retargeted to your production source as you bring in your dev environment. And then at that stage, once you've done that and you've done your final checks to your app to make sure that the data is showing accurate, your production data is showing accurately, you can now start to roll out the new version of your app. And there's a couple ways to do this depending on the scale at which your app is used. If you have thousands of users or tens of thousands of users of your app, you'll probably wouldn't want to just roll it out all at once to all the users. You could do a controlled rollout of the latest version. And this is where you can set a percentage. So you could start to roll things out very slowly and then ultimately roll it up to 100% as needed. Excuse me. But to roll the app out all at once, you're going to want to click this button here again and make the current version the new stable version. And as soon as you hit this button, your app is immediately now deployed, and updated to your people in the field. So with that, I'll pause there. I know that was a lot, and hopefully that wasn't overbearing, but that's basically the best practice, the way AppSheet's currently constructed today, to seamlessly upgrade your app in the background without having to bring your app down for multiple hours at a time.
Awesome. Thank you both for the information and demonstrations. We have about 10 minutes now, so we are going to rapid fire run through your questions. Thank you for submitting those. Just following up to your presentation and demonstration, Rich, we had a question to confirm. Here we go. Just to be clear, most of what you are showing is only available under the enterprise plan, or any other information that you can provide there?
This should be available under core plans as well. I don't believe there's any. There should be no restriction on version history. The only thing that would change from plan to plan is how long of a version history is kept in your app. But all app versions should have this capability. I'm fairly confident in that.
Great. Okay. Can you speak to best methods for developing a new version of a deployed app, test with users, and then push the new version out to replace the previously deployed version? And I bring this question up because I believe that's what you just showed. But yeah. Okay, perfect. And then I think there's a follow-up here is in the direction of that question. How can you scale your deployment if you have 10 plus similar apps running at the same time?
I'm going to take that as I'm not sure what you mean by similar apps, but I guess in general, regardless of the application, each app is isolated on its own. So there's really no scale that you can get at that stage. Even if they're connected to the same data source, they're each going to have their own unique properties, and there's no way to, at this time, have shared components of apps or things like that. Now, that's something we're looking into for the future, where you can have shared components in your app. So if you have something, in your case, which would be 10 similar apps with maybe similar features, we're looking into that, but we have nothing to share at this time.
Sounds good. All right. Here's one. I'm interested in knowing the process of the definition of the app for a customer.
I can offer a suggestion, at least. If you're building an app for a customer, you'll definitely want to kind of follow some of the guidance that I provided earlier in the presentation. You want to understand their use case in depth. You want to understand the data requirements. You want to essentially get a good feel for like what the customer is looking to see, their end result. And so that's where you start to build kind of like, even if it's just a document, kind of like you can start to mock out or get the process flow figured out. And then just make sure that the use case is, if you're on the same page with regards to the use case. I typically recommend an approach which can be fairly iterative, fairly rapid, in the sense that you can always strive for an MVP. Essentially, your first level of minimally viable application, I guess, where you get the application in a running state, and then you can meet with the customers, you can iterate, you can take in any changes, and that's where AppSheet really starts to shine because you have the ability to start making these quick updates without really going into any extensive process for how to do that. So it's typically like more like a, I would say, modern to some degree, iterative app design and prototyping. So essentially constant updates and iterations in that sense, if that's helpful.
Great.
Cool. I also wanted to add in there, I was wrong when I told you that the stable version control was available for any plan. I wanted to correct that. That is correct. It's for enterprise plans only, so enterprise standard and enterprise plus. I apologize for that.
Sounds good. Thanks for asking the questions. All right. Here's our next one. If I have a spreadsheet with app script, now if I convert it to app using AppSheet, will the script functionality still work?
I can take that one. So if you may have heard me when I said I can connect, or maybe I did. I've had so many presentations in the last few days. So typically we launched a feature a couple of months ago back in April that allows you to take an AppSheet app and have it call AppScript. But the very important point is that you can connect a AppScript code, but it has to be standalone. It's not essentially document-bound AppScript. So if you have a typical spreadsheet with some code inside that spreadsheet that is executing whatever you need to, you would have to maybe take that code. So like, for example, if you have a spreadsheet that if you trigger it from a menu, like a customized menu that you built with AppScript inside your spreadsheet, you would typically take that custom code or take the document bound bit of AppScript, and you could turn that AppScript, as long as you don't have necessarily references to the document itself. It's like on change, all these kind of events that you normally get when you're bound to a particular document. If you take those references out, but if you just preserve any server-side standalone logic and put that into a standalone function in AppScript, then you could have your AppSheet app make a call to that standalone function in an automation. So if you go back to our video where we walk through how to do that, but basically you create an automation, you can then have it trigger off an event and have it pull up, or you specifically choose an AppScript project and the function, and then you can set up the parameters, and then you're up and running. You can do essentially what you're describing.
And also I'll add in there, because I think part of the question too is what happens if my sheet already has an AppScript on there, and it'll just keep working, because the reality is when you connect a sheet to an app, that sheet's still staying independent of the app itself.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Any AppScript logic you have in that sheet will continue to work, because the app itself is always writing back to the sheet as if you are using the sheet directly. So just kind of keep that in mind. There is the AppScript piece, which you can definitely convert it, and it's going to be more efficient with the new AppScript functionality. But if you did want to, still leverage that in a quick and easy way, you have that ability to, still keep that at the same.
Great.
Yep, makes sense.
Okay. Are there any plans to include some kind of switch to keep existing data sources during an update rather than having to repoint the updated app to the original data source?
Yeah, so that's something we're exploring. It's definitely in our plans. We just don't have any dates to share at this time. It is something that myself have requested multiple times. So it's definitely something we want to do.
Cool. Okay. What apps are best for live instant updates from platform to platform? I guess maybe if you can provide a little bit more context for that one.
I'm kind of curious, like what exactly is meant from platform to platform.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure on that one. But,
all right. If you can provide a little bit more context, you can, or information and details, we can respond. Can I export AppSheet CRM file, then take my external CRM and fit it in the AppSheet format? Can I then import the new list into an existing AppSheet CRM app?
The There is no. I'm not sure what you mean by CRM file. I'm not sure if that you mean the spreadsheet on the back end.
Yeah.
When you copy a CRM template, maybe. But you could basically take your spreadsheet back in, right? It's totally independent, like I had mentioned. So you can always take what's there and create another app against it. And that's actually one of the strengths of AppSheet is if you have a data source, you can actually have multiple apps connect to the same data source if you want. And that could help with, cross-functional teams maybe needing different apps, but still relying on the same data in the background.
Yeah. The thing to remember is that AppSheet is separate from the data. It's not like a built-in data engine, data modeling environment. In our roadmap, though, just to kind of give you a little teaser, we actually are adding that functionality to where you can actually define your data models directly inside of AppSheet, not necessarily have to step outside to another data source like a sheet or something like that. So it's something to keep your eyes out on. And if you're familiar with tables, you'll understand how that's all going to fit in together. So.
Awesome. Yeah, and there are a few questions around tables, we will make sure to get to those. But one just follow up around CSVs is I understood we can in the presentation and a CSV is a possible data source. Can we update it periodically and that this updates the data in the app sheet?
So CSV directly as opposed to bringing it into a sheet is what you were saying? No, you don't actually operate directly on the CSV. Basically, you can take a CSV and put it into a cloud-based spreadsheet in that sense, if that's what you meant.
Sounds good. I do see we have lots of questions, so and we are at time. So
Yeah.
I do want to be respectful of everyone's time, but this may warrant just a continued conversation on this. And of course, we'll be keeping the conversation going in the community and answering any questions that we weren't able to get to. So thank you for sticking with us if you've been here for the time. And yeah, we'll keep in touch in the community. Any final thoughts from you, Rich or Christian?
Just other than that, yeah, we'll try to handle the questions as they come in. And yeah, it looks like, we could probably even spend another hour on a lot of this stuff. So it's good to know, though, I guess. Important topics coming up here.
Absolutely. And yeah, if you do have any specific topics that you weren't already addressing in the questions, we'd love to hear your feedback, what you want us to dive into deeper in the office hours feedback form. So that's that third link there on the screen. Anything from you, Rich? Or
No, thanks everybody. And I'm sure there'll be questions over my section. So please put them in the community. I'll make sure I answer them. Hopefully I didn't cause more confusion. But yeah, everyone have a good one.
Same here. Yeah.
Sounds great. We'll be in touch. Thanks, everyone. See you next time. Bye.
Okay.